Hello there, and welcome to the latest edition of The Global in the Granite State, a podcast of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. For those first-time listeners, or even the long-time ones who don't remember, my name is Tim Horgan, and I am the Executive Director of the Council, as well as your host for this monthly series. The World Affairs Council of New Hampshire is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, community-supported organization that provides you with quality content on international issues. As we do our part to foster a globally engaged community that holds factual conversations, we need you to do your part by engaging and contributing to our success. Without a strong community of members, donors, and sponsors, none of this would be possible. Thank you to those who have already taken the step to support this work, especially in these uncertain times in international relations. As various funding mechanisms become less stable, the need for community support continues to grow. The more unsettled the world becomes, the more programs are needed to unpack it all. We hope you will take a moment to hop over to our website at wacnh.org to become a member or donor today. Speaking of strong community supporters, a super special thank you to McLean Middleton for their ongoing support of this podcast. We are honored to have your sponsorship of this and other programs. McLean Middleton is one of New England's premier full-service law firms with over 115 attorneys throughout offices in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. McLean Middleton's attorneys have been providing trusted legal services to businesses throughout the region for over 100 years. Learn more at mclean.com. Now, on with the show. Over the past 250 years, the United States has engaged with the world in a wide variety of ways. From George Washington counseling the newly born nation to avoid political alliances with foreign nations and instead focus on building trade, to the more muscular foreign policy of Teddy Roosevelt, who implored the country to speak softly but carry a big stick. Then came the two world wars, which brought a reluctant U.S. into the fight, and the work the country did to build global systems that would prevent the next catastrophe, some efforts working better than others. This then led into the hyper-awareness of competing on the ideological global scale through the lens of the domino theory of containing the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. After the fall of the Soviet Union, it was, quote-unquote, the end of history, democracy had won, the unipolar moment, and the peace dividend. The 9/11 attacks shook that foundation, kicking off the war on terror and its wide-ranging implications for U.S. engagement around the world. As we enter a new age of U.S. global engagement, with the Trump administration upending traditional norms, programs, alliances, and pretty much everything else, now is the time to take a look at what U.S. foreign policy is, why it's important to understand, and what everyday people can do to have an effect on how the U.S. engages the world.
Foreign policy ends up being the sum total of all the stuff we're doing internationally, whether it's to pursue security, a better U.S. economy, or just trying to represent who we are in the world because we want the world to reflect those values.
That is Andrew Albertson, the founding executive director of Foreign Policy for America, a think tank dedicated to strengthening support for principled U.S. leadership in the world. Now, what does that look like in practice?
We're trying to strengthen support for principled U.S. leadership in the world for our internationalist tradition. And what we mean by that is openness to the world. We want to be engaged and active. We want to be open to trade and immigration. We think that benefits us. We want to work together with other countries and international bodies like the UN, which we help to build and construct, World Bank, and all sorts of other international entities to solve problems, because we think that's better than everybody kind of fighting for themselves. We support human rights and democracy and development and values that are bigger than just narrowly defined security. When it comes to making that decision to go to war, take military action, we don't want to go it alone. We want to work in concert with all of our allies and our alliances. So those are sort of the tenets of that internationalist tradition.
But to what end? How does an engaged United States that is leading in support of human rights, democracy, development, and an interconnected world help everyday Americans?
If you think about it, it is a little counterintuitive. We're talking about investing in institutions that make the world work, investing in a rules-based international order, investing in other countries working out, protecting the human rights of people outside our borders. We do it all because we think that over some time period benefits us as well, makes it sort of a safer, more prosperous world to live in. Other countries thriving means we have markets to sell our products to. Other countries thriving means that when they're bumping up against a public health emergency, they can handle it on their own rather than it coming back into our country. So that benefits us. I take the point that it's sort of a counterintuitive, enlightened sense of self-interest. It's not so direct as let's close out our borders and just take care of our own. But the counter argument is that internationalist vision of US role in the world has worked really well for 75, 80 years since the end of World War II. You think about that period for our country. Think about the last 30 or so years for the world. It's really been, you could argue, the greatest 30 years in terms of improvements in human welfare in world history.
Many people today, and for the past decade plus, have been pushing the idea that our foreign policy has not put America first, and that instead we have been leading the world, quote-unquote, from behind. Many others believe that we are overcommitted to the world and that we need to end all of this, quote-unquote, waste, fraud, and abuse in foreign aid. Quick point here. Check out our last episode on demystifying USAID to learn more about the inaccuracies and what you have been hearing in that space. But getting back to the exact topic at hand, why does the idea of America First bring such support, and what does it miss?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great slogan. I want America first, too. We don't want America second. And, obviously that's policymakers are always trying to bring wins back for their communities, for the families, for their constituents. Congress really is the driver a lot of times of making sure that our values are represented in our foreign policy. So it's interesting. The folks that are most close to the ground, that are most close to the communities that they represent, are oftentimes the voice for thinking of folks on the other side of the border as God's children too. Trying to think about what kind of leader we want to be in the world. Other countries are going to work with us and partner with us, and we have a unique ability to bring people together. What do we want that to look like? Whether we want to hold firm to our commitments and follow through or not. It's just interesting how our system works that way, where it ends up being Congress that is thinking about a more expansive vision of who we want to be in the world, how we want to act, and how that brings benefits back to our communities. But I get where America First is coming from and President Trump's rhetoric there. Over the last 75, 80 years, we've pursued this enlightened sense of our self-interest we call internationalism.
Going back to our conversation last year with Ambassador Mark Starella, it is important to mention at this point that American foreign policy has always aimed to put America's interests first. The government may not have always done a great job of explaining that to the public, but it has always been at the heart of what we do. Now, you can disagree on what America's interests and values are, which is something that has arisen more recently, as the old maxim of politics ends at the border does not hold much weight anymore today. Politics has definitely entered the conversation of foreign policy, for better or worse. In that same vein, there has always been a debate over whether Americans care about the world, want to engage with it, etc. When things have become so politicized, what are we seeing in terms of everyday Americans' interest in solving some of these global issues?
I think Americans do care about the rest of the world, care about our foreign policy, probably care about it the right amount. A lot of folks are going through a lot right now. They don't need more chaos. They don't need more wars, and we don't need more things to add to that list. But the bottom line is we're talking about the house we live in. And when the world is thriving, when countries are more and more prosperous, when they're more and more democratic, when you're seeing more kids going to school and better public health outcomes, less disease, less conflicts breaking out, it's just a better, safer planet for us all to live in. And we are really interconnected. Climate change doesn't really respect borders. Diseases don't really respect borders. When there's recession in one part of the world, it may well affect us. And so you've seen American presidents of both parties for a long time be such good stewards of that international system that served us so well. It's just kind of the air and the atmosphere. We sort of don't see it anymore. We kind of take it for granted. I think we will learn over the next little bit here what happens when you kind of tear up chunks of what's been working well in the world for a while. When you neglect U.S. leadership, which has really been a backbone of that international system that's worked so well.
This is something that I really want to explore further in future conversations. The idea that so many indicators tell us that the world, and uniquely the United States, has been improving, and yet so many people do not see or feel that. What drives this disconnect? Are the metrics that people point to wrong or not accurate predictors of human well-being? Are people believing what they are told rather than what they are experiencing? If you've got the answer, let's talk. Along with this, we are seeing massive changes to the international system as rising and revisionist powers are looking to challenge the United States leadership position. Whether it is China's efforts to woo the world to their side, Russia's efforts to bring back territorial expansion through force, or the United States' own efforts to defund major portions of the international system it helped to build, there are no shortages of challenges to face, understand, and attempt to solve, no matter how difficult that work will be.
It's absolutely true. The world's changing, and you've always got to kind of evolve and adapt to that changing world. The big thing that's changing is the relative decline in power of the U.S. versus the entire rest of the world. So clearly, the U.S. has by far the most powerful military. We invest more in our military than any other country. We have the world's greatest economy. In so many different ways, we're still home to the greatest entrepreneurship and innovators in the world. The biggest tech companies, the most cutting edge technologies are still coming from the US. The research and development centered on American universities and companies is still without match. So in so many ways, we're still a comfortable leader, right? But if you add up all the other countries together, all the other world powers, we are not so dominant as we once were, maybe in the 90s, for example, or even before. And, that's not such a bad thing. That means there's a lot of other countries thriving, like I was just saying, in buying our products. That means there's other countries that can kind of take care of their security in ways that they don't have to rely on us entirely anymore. Those aren't bad things. It is a change and present some questions for policymakers of how to adapt to that, as you said. And the fundamental thing, the big thing that's center stage for so many policymakers is, what do we do about a rising China that in some ways is trying to compete with our economy, with our research and development capacity? It's trying to attract the best and brightest minds to come and start companies in China. It's built a manufacturing capacity that exceeds our country right now. When we're talking about the cutting edge technologies, they might be not too far behind leading edge American companies in terms of AI, in terms of quantum computing, that technologies of the future. So there's a real competition there. And it presents a choice. How worried should we be? How insecure should we be? And how comfortable should we be that if we keep investing in the stuff that's driven our success in the past, we'll be fine? I hope that's not too reductionist and sort of trying to boil down that shift in relative power that I think is driving some changes and thinking about our role in the world. The other thing is true is, I was just telling this story about the post-World War II international architecture that was built and developed and solved a lot of problems, and in many ways created a foundation for a rules-based international order that served us all really well. But again, those institutions were built a long time ago, and some of them have not worked as well as we'd like. The World Trade Organization, for example, and some of them are just outdated and need to be reformed. And it's really hard to reform international institutions, it turns out. So you sort of hear the creaking and groaning of that international system, and sometimes cause problems for our ability to pursue our goals.
However, there is a right and a wrong way to approach the reshaping of these institutions, as well as the United States' position on engaging with the world. Many people may celebrate the destruction or elimination of funding for many of the global institutions that help shape the world, such as the UN Human Rights Council, the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization, just to name a few. I certainly appreciate people's rights to that opinion. The question I would like to hear them answer is, how does ceding leadership of these organizations to countries such as China and Russia serve our interest? Just because we are not at the table does not mean they go away. It does not mean that they will no longer shape the international conversation on these issues. It does not mean that we will be unaffected by anything that comes out of these groups. In addition, many of the same people have celebrated the dismantling of government agencies such as USAID and government-funded nonprofits such as the U.S. Institute of Peace in a chaotic way. Rather than working with the Republican-controlled House and Senate to wind these programs down, the administration has simply looked to starve these organizations of resources to make it impossible for them to complete their missions. Some people have indicated to me that this is simply the best way to see what is necessary and where they can trim the fat. This may work fine for a tech company, where if their online service goes down or the quality of the product diminishes for a little while, it only hurts the company, its employees, and investors. However, when you destroy life-saving programs and prevent mothers in Africa from getting antiretrovirals, even for just a few weeks, you are destroying lives. Again, the administration may have a right to wind down these programs, but they also have a responsibility to do it in a way that minimizes the worst of the impacts. They also have a duty to work through the machinations of government to do this in a legal way. Okay, personal rant over. As a former USAID worker in Afghanistan, what does Andrew think of how this has been approached?
I mean, it's really heartbreaking. Yeah, it's true. American foreign policy or elected officials, what they're trying to do is work to secure our interests in the world. We're also trying to kind of represent who Americans are, who we want to be in the world. USAID has had a lot of practical benefits for the American public. We've helped develop other economies, which again, they're buying our products, which is a good thing. We've helped countries to stabilize their politics. They're not falling into civil war or they're not having coups. That's a good thing. When there are less crises in the world, it makes it a little bit calmer, safer world for Americans too. But we've also responded to humanitarian crises. We've been there when people are hurting, and they remember that. When a famine is broken out, we have extraordinary American farmers, agricultural capacity. And so USAID buys crops from American farmers and ships it over to feed communities that are starving. That's a good thing. We should all be really proud of that. When there are diseases breaking out and we have world-beating medicines, our pharmaceutical companies are the best in the world, and we can help treat folks who are sick, prevent diseases from spreading, that's a good thing for Americans to be up to at extraordinarily low cost. It's also something that benefits us because if you're going to fight Ebola, pick where you're fighting it. I'd like it to be over there, to be honest, rather than fighting it closer to our borders. But the other thing that you got to think about, besides just how heartbreaking that is, and I should add, I was just reading earlier today, the Center for Global Development. Oh, perhaps your speaker from the last podcast put out an analysis. They say, by best estimates, and put some effort into this, and the Center for Global Development really is kind of the leader in that field. We're talking about 2 or 3 million lives saved per year by USAID work. And again, extraordinarily cost effective, extraordinary oversight to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. But just to put it in a little bit different terms, because we were mainly talking about kind of our alliances and stuff. There are a lot of countries where the most important kind of partnership we can show up with is not military assistance. There are a lot of countries where the most important way we can show up as a partner is trying to root out corruption in their system, or it's trying to defeat Ebola or other diseases, immunize kids so they don't get malaria. It's all sorts of other kinds of partnerships. And actually, the primary arm and the face of American partnership is USAID in a lot of countries. Not only did we kind of wind down that assistance, but we cut it so abruptly, so chaotically. I mean, it really leaves the impression that we just don't care, not just about folks who aren't able to pick up their next antiretroviral treatment, but we don't care about that country in our partnership. And so suddenly you add all this up, all the different countries we're trying to surprise with tariffs, all the different countries where we may or may not be threatening to turn off the weapon systems we sold them, all the different countries where we've haphazardly shut down our USAID programs. Suddenly, we're kind of alone. For a lot of reasons, that's not a good place to be.
Alliances are another area that have come into question more recently. The Trump administration has left its commitment to NATO's Article 5 collective defense responsibility vague and unclear. They have targeted friends, allies, and adversaries alike with tariffs and other sanctions. They have even threatened military action against NATO allies in Greenland and Canada to take their territory by force. What does this all mean for how the United States currently views alliances, as well as how our allies view us?
Sometimes we look at Russia and China and we think, oh my gosh, they're working together. Or you say Russia and Iran seem to have a military assistance relationship, or China and Russia have a relationship with North Korea. And we think, this is a problem. But you kind of reverse the lens. You think about from China or Russia's perspective, and they look at the U.S., and we are tied in closely with our Asian allies and partners, starting with Japan and South Korea. Our NATO alliance is the greatest military alliance in world history, arguably. And we have military assistance relationships, security partnerships, all sorts of partnerships, honestly, around the world in a way that those countries could only dream of. No doubt that is somewhat daunting to challenge. That's a good thing. In practical terms, when we talk about alliances, a lot of times we're talking about the security aspects, right? Probably most importantly, the hard military effects of an alliance. The NATO example, The heart of NATO, this collective security idea is that an attack on one is an attack on all. So if Russia rolls tanks into Poland, that we're going to be with them. But the truth is, only one time in NATO's history was that Article 5 commitment called up, and it was us. We asked our allies to say, listen, we've been attacked on 9/11. We need to root out the source of this terrorism in Afghanistan, and we want you to come along and fight with us. And they did. It's powerful to have alliances, both for their actual military capacity they bring and also the deterrent ability to say, don't attack us because you're going to be fighting with a whole bunch of other countries, not just us.
Going all the way back to Eisenhower, American presidents have complained about burden sharing in the NATO alliance. Let me ask you this question, though. If our allies have tied their security to the U.S. commitments, doesn't that give us unprecedented leverage over them to support our global initiatives? In addition, would the U.S. pull back all its forward-stationed troops if we were to abandon these alliances because they are not, quote-unquote, paying their fair share? That can be a conversation for another day, but it is one thing I would like to see answered from those who want to build peace through strength. The other point to cover in this conversation about alliances is the idea that collective action has a much larger impact on the world than unilateral action. For example,
when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, crazy moment in history, because for a long time, for decades now, kind of a bedrock idea of international relations is you can't conquer territory by force. Big countries can't just roll over little countries and gobble them up. And here it is. Russia is trying to not just take control of Crimea, but now all of Ukraine. They really went for Kyiv and they wanted to control the country and take it over and absorb it. Putin said, Ukraine isn't really a country. And at that moment, President Biden and his administration, I think, had a couple tools in their toolkit. First, intelligence. They said, this is happening. We know this is happening. You're going to see some false flag attacks. You're going to hear a lot of stuff. But I'm telling you, Russia has tanks poised at the border because they're going to invade. Preemptively sharing intelligence with the world to let people know this is happening and to shake people's, I think it was hard to imagine, but to help people start imagining what was about to take place. Second thing is, certainly we rushed weapons, assistance to Ukraine to help Ukrainians defend their country. Now, we didn't send American troops to fight, which is a good thing. What we needed to do and what Ukrainians had asked for is to equip them and assist them to defend their own territory, to save their own country and their own democracy. And they have fought valiantly, and it's something we should all be really proud of, that we've assisted Ukrainians in that fight. But the third thing, and actually the most important thing, was economic. We brought down extraordinary economic sanctions on Russia, on Russian businesses, and the oligarchs that are essential to Putin's regime. Not just us alone, but all sorts of other countries, our close allies around the world, ones you might not suspect, ones that had a hard time imagining this was possible, stood with the United States in bringing to bear these broad multilateral sanctions that have had a devastating effect on the Russian economy and frankly put a timeline on how long they can fight this war. When we talk about alliances, the effects, the value that it brings back to Americans is broad and multifaceted. It is most importantly because the power of those alliances keep us safe and prevent countries from threatening us. But it's so much more than that.
Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war and how the United States should approach it has become one of the most polarizing discussions in U.S. foreign policy today. While accusations fly from both sides of the aisle, what we should be able to recognize in those that we disagree with is that no one wants to see this go on forever. What this comes down to is what costs are people willing to pay to get peace. As our high school students who have engaged in diplomacy simulations have recognized, peace at any cost is not a lasting peace. These agreements are difficult to create and sustain. If you give everything away to one side or the other, you haven't actually solved anything, and you are simply creating an environment for a resumption of hostilities when the aggrieved side rebuilds its forces.
War is awful. It's horrific. The technology we have today, people are walking around with phones in their pockets that can give you instant images of the terrible war in Ukraine, what it means for communities there. And it's a good impulse that nobody wants that to continue forever, right? Anybody that wants to bring a stop to that war, I'm right there with you. The challenge is one of the two parties in this war is an aggressor. Putin invaded Ukraine, full force of his army across the border and tried to take over the country. He's kidnapped children, destroyed communities. If he would just stop that, the war would end right there. And obviously, any peace-loving, democracy-supporting society like ours, you look at a dictator like Putin, and that's what you got to hope for. So he just stops trying to invade, not just Ukraine. He has a history of invading, taking military action against neighboring countries. So it'd just be better for all of us if all that stopped. I think sometimes people talk about like foreign policy and geopolitics like it's a super complicated three-dimensional chess thing, but it's pretty straightforward. All of us have seen a bully, a maniac in action. And here Putin has said he wants to destroy NATO. He wants to destroy Ukraine. He doesn't think Ukraine should be a country. He has all these frustrations going back to the destruction of the Soviet Union decades ago when he was a KGB officer and is ashamed of the fall of the great Soviet Union that he was a part of. And he wants to reverse all that. If you think he's going to stop at Ukraine, you think he's going to be successful in taking over Ukraine, and the world kind of lets him do that, and then he's going to stop there. That's crazy. What is the principle? What's the restraint that's going to stop him from going into Moldova, for example, where there's also a separatist community might say he's got to support. So, the truth is, it's just a tough moment where you have to call Putin the dictator that he is and try to figure out how do we rally together as democracies, as advanced economies, the United States and our European allies, to stop it, put our forces, our resources together to do that. And the rest of it's just a question about who does what kind of resources should we provide, how do we burden share. Those are important questions, but it's clear that the best time to stop a bully in his tracks is as soon as possible. It is costly. It is a big commitment that we've made to help assist Ukrainians to defend their country, save their democracy, save their communities. It's a very cost-effective, smart, efficient approach to the scale of this problem because the alternative could just be much, much worse.
Beyond the impact on Ukraine and what it could mean for the rest of Europe if Putin feels he is successful in achieving his goals through force, what do our actions over the past 3 months signal to the rest of the world about the reliability of the U.S. as a partner?
Recently, obviously, for a bit, President Trump halted our military assistance to Ukraine, halted our intelligence partnership with Ukraine, which is a bigger deal. It has been reported that we provide a lot of support for Ukrainian targeting, for the understanding of the battlefield, and that probably is as central of a piece as just the weapons shipments. And then the last thing we did, which is really unbelievable to me, I had to kind of read it a couple times to take it all in. There are ways we can turn off certain weapon systems that we have provided to other countries. So countries might buy, we have a kill switch, and we did that with some of the weapon systems. That behavior has a whole lot of implications. Number one, Portugal doesn't want to buy F-35s from us anymore because we can turn off key aspects of that technology. How can they possibly rely on it in the worst case scenarios when they're fighting a war? It's crazy. And we're going to see that with other countries too, questioning what kinds of military sales and assistance relationships they can have with the US. If there's a risk that every 4 years somebody might turn off your fighter jets, that's kind of a problem. The second thing is countries like Canada, most importantly, are asking, why is it that Trump is starting to sound like Vladimir Putin with spheres of influence and talking about taking over Greenland one way or the other? When we, the United States, start sounding like a bully ourselves, it's not going to take that long before some of those bullied countries kind of gang up together and work together and either reduce their reliance on us, which is going to have a negative impact on American businesses and all sorts of other things, but even start creating their own consequences together. So that's a problem. But I think the other thing, Russia is not the only country in the world with territorial ambitions, with the capacity to kind of roll over a smaller neighbor. And most importantly, China has talked about trying to have a military capable of taking over Taiwan by military force by 2027, so within Trump administration's term. It's true, we don't have a lot of economic interests tied up in Ukraine. They ship a lot of grain, food prices go up, people starve. That's a problem for the US. We talked about the threats to European security. That's a problem for us. We don't have a lot of economic interests tied up in Ukraine as much as some other places. Taiwan, if China takes over Taiwan and you see the ripple effect, taking over the largest chips manufacturer as one example of the extraordinary Taiwanese economy, the largest chips manufacturer upon which all sorts of technologies and companies rely, including like the entire American car industry. If that happens, devastating economic catastrophe for the United States. And so that's why every administration for decades now has treated that very, very, very carefully and tried to maintain that fragile status quo and try to equip Taiwan, talk about kind of a porcupine strategy, prevent anybody from being able to take them over, not necessarily commit that the US will fight a war alongside Taiwan, and also kind of keeping in line with our long-standing diplomatic commitments to China and the one China policy, enunciate that also. So that delicate dance, that fragile diplomacy that we pursued for so long is really overturned when Trump seems to be okay, forgetting about the principle that you can't acquire territory by military force.
Finally, the reshaping of our own values and interests on the international stage has big impacts with our friends, allies, and adversaries. We have received a lot of questions here at the Council about whether we should take President Trump's threats to Canada, Greenland, and Panama seriously, as he looks to annex these countries and territories for various reasons.
There's a whole lot of Americans, Republicans, and Democrats alike that might agree that this is a departure from where we've been in the past, talking about taking over Greenland by whatever means necessary or annexing Canada or something. I think it's important to come at these new elements of the Trump foreign policy with a certain amount of respect. I take it seriously. President Trump has, in many cases, kind of outlined his goals. People kind of shrug it off, and then over some amount of time, he's still pushing and trying to bend everybody to his will to get it to happen. And so I take it very seriously. You look at what we're hearing from Canadian elected officials, they take it pretty seriously too. But let's think about it this way. You're in the Army, you're in the Navy, you're a military service member, your spouse is, your cousin is, your neighbor is. I've never served in the military. Let me just start there. I went out to Afghanistan as part of USAID, and part of USAID called the Office of Transition Initiatives, because I wanted to serve in my own way and be part of the effort. So I had the opportunity to work alongside a lot of military service members, and certainly when I'm thinking about these issues of war and peace, there's a lot of friends that I'm thinking of in particular. So let's picture those folks in our lives. If you say there's a terrorist attack in our country, we need to defend our country and go fight those guys, they're ready. Let's go. If you say there's a possibility that some troops might spill over a border, one of our allies, maybe we've never fought alongside them before, but we have always committed to, and if that happens, yes, we are ready to go. It's extraordinary, courageous folks that have signed up to serve. But what if President Trump is asking them, I mean, he's implying that he's willing to send military service members to fight Greenland. He's implying that we should be willing, by some means or other, to take over Canada. And I just have a hard time with all that, because I don't think he really connects with all the different lives that would affect, all the different communities that would affect, and certainly the American service members that have signed up to defend our country. So I do take it very seriously, and I think that's what we're talking about.
At the end of the day, the U.S. president does have the right to shape U.S. foreign policy and engage with the world in the way that they prefer. The argument is not against the administration's right to do that. However, it is important that the United States represents its citizens' interests in the world and approaches the world in a way that we want. That means if you are happy or unhappy with the way in which the government is approaching the world, stand up and make your voice heard. Engage in programs with the World Affairs Council in your area or online. Challenge perspectives, share your insights, and engage in respectful conversations with your community. We at the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire encourage deep dialogues on these critical issues and hope you will join us to increase the impact we can have on the world. This has been The Global in the Granite State, a podcast of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. Thank you so much for taking the time to engage in this program, and we hope you will continue to join us for our various programs throughout the year. As a community-supported organization, we need your assistance in growing our programming and ensuring we can continue to bring quality content to you. Join us as a member or donate today to show your support at wacnh.org. As always, Tim Horgan is the workhorse behind this program, handling the production, direction, recording, editing, fact-checking, design, and management of the podcast. Our theme music remains admin by A.A. Alto, and our interlude music is Time to Win by Audio Library Infinite. See you next time.